Let's start with a fact that should be a lot more disturbing than it is. For the overwhelming majority of the time our ancestors have existed, they were completely, permanently, unapologetically naked. Not naked like a bad decision at a music festival, naked as a lifestyle. Naked as the default setting of an entire species for well over 1,000,000 years. No pants, no shame, no concept of an outfit, just a bare pink primate wandering around the savannah with absolutely nothing on, and no idea that one day its descendants would invent the turtleneck and then argue about it. So somewhere between that and this, something changed. We covered up. And we covered up so thoroughly that today we have laws about it. There are places on Earth where being naked is a crime. We went from zero clothing to legally mandated clothing, and the switch flipped somewhere in the dark. The question is when, and the honest, slightly infuriating answer is that finding that moment is one of the hardest jobs in all of archaeology, because clothing has one fatal flaw: it rots. A stone tool will sit in the dirt for 2,000,000 years and come out looking basically fine, maybe a little dusty. Fabric, hide, fur, plant fiber, gone. It decays, it crumbles, it dissolves back into the ground within a few thousand years, and there is nothing left to find. So the very first thing a human ever wore evaporated long before anyone thought to look for it. Which means we can't find the beginning directly. We have to climb down toward it, one piece of evidence at a time, and each rung of the ladder gets older and weirder than the last. So let's climb. Rung 1 is an actual dress, and the story of how we found it is genuinely ridiculous. In 1913, a British archaeologist named Flinders Petrie was digging around a cemetery in Egypt. He got into a tomb, and it was basically empty. A few jars, a couple of wooden handles, a pot lid, and a heap of filthy old linen that looked like exactly what it was: a pile of ancient laundry. So he did what any reasonable person does with dirty laundry. He shoved it in a box and left it there, for over 60 years. It wasn't until 1977 that conservators went through that pile and realized the crumpled dirty rag at the bottom was a nearly complete linen dress, with sleeves, with pleats, still holding its shape. It's called the Tarkhan dress, and when it was finally dated in 2015, it came in at roughly 5,500 years old, making it the oldest piece of clothing ever recovered anywhere on Earth. Sit with that. The oldest surviving garment in human history spent 6 decades in a museum drawer labeled, essentially, old rags. But here's the part that stops you. 5,500 years is embarrassingly recent. That's after farming. That's basically the pyramids era. Humans had been around for hundreds of thousands of years by then, and there is not a single stitch of clothing older that has survived intact. So the dress isn't the answer, it's just the top rung. Go down. Rung 2 takes us to Turkey, to a famously ancient settlement where archaeologists digging in burials pulled out fragments of actual woven cloth, roughly 9,000 years old. And the story of those scraps is a lesson in how science corrects itself. When they were first found, researchers concluded they were wool. Decades later, new analysis said no, it's plant fiber, probably flax. Then a re-examination said actually, no again, these were made from bast fiber, harvested from the inner bark of trees. Somebody 9,000 years ago was stripping bark, softening it, spinning it, and weaving it into cloth. That pushes us thousands of years deeper. But we're still nowhere near the beginning, and we've run out of surviving cloth. So we have to change the question. Here's the trick that unlocks everything. You think of a shirt as a thing. It isn't. A shirt is the last step of a long chain. Before the shirt, there was fabric. Before the fabric, there was thread. Before the thread, there were raw fibers. And before any of it, there were tools to work with. So even when the garment is gone, the chain might still be lying around. And that reframing takes us to rung 3, in a cave in the country of Georgia, where archaeologists found hundreds of tiny flax fibers, not just lying there, spun, twisted deliberately into thread. At least one of them tied in a knot, which is not something flax does on its own, and several of them were dyed, black, gray, turquoise, and one lone fiber that came out pink. Those fibers are around 30,000 years old. 30,000, 6 times older than the dress. And notice what that actually means, because it's beautiful. The oldest evidence we have of people making thread is also evidence of people dyeing it turquoise and pink. Humans did not have a long practical phase before deciding clothing should look nice. Fashion appears to arrive at essentially the same moment as fabric. Somebody in an Ice Age cave looked at a perfectly functional string and thought, yeah, but what if it were pink? That is the most human thing in this entire video. Now go deeper, to rung 4, and drop the fabric entirely. Because if you've ever tried to make a garment, you know it takes tools. Specifically, it takes something to punch and pull through hide. In a cave in South Africa, archaeologists found a collection of bone tools, and among them a fragment of a needle, with a point so fine that the best explanation is that it was made for piercing animal skin delicately. That needle is roughly 61,000 years old. No cloth, no garment, just the instrument, which is a bit like finding a paintbrush with no painting. But you don't make a needle that fine unless you are stitching something with it. And now we hit the last rung, and it's the grossest one, and it's my favorite. Lice. Humans are host to two kinds of lice, and the difference is everything. Head lice live in the hair on your head. Body lice, despite the name, do not live on your body. They live in your clothes, in the seams, in the folds, popping out only to feed and then retreating into the fabric like tiny commuters. Which means body lice literally cannot exist without clothing. There's nowhere for them to live. So the moment body lice split off from head lice and became their own separate thing is, roughly, the moment humans started wearing something regularly enough to build a whole new habitat for a parasite. Scientists sequenced their DNA, ran the clock backwards, and got a range of somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. And that's the deepest rung of the ladder. Humanity's earliest fashion statement, recorded not in stone, not in art, not in writing, but in the genome of an insect that moved into our pants and never left. But before you take that as the final answer, there's a catch, and it's an important one. That date doesn't tell us when clothing started. It tells us when lice showed up. There could easily have been a long stretch where people wore hides and the lice hadn't gotten around to colonizing them yet. So even 170,000 years is a floor, not a starting line. And it only covers our own species. Our cousins were up to something too. Neanderthals, living through genuine ice ages, left behind stone scrapers designed to strip tissue from animal hide, which is step one of making anything wearable. And when researchers looked at the animal bones piled up at their sites, certain species kept appearing: wolves, foxes, hares, not exactly prime dinner options, but exactly the animals you'd want for warm fur. Those same species show up at early human sites too, though more often, which might hint that we were lining our clothing with fur more heavily than they were. So this urge was never uniquely ours. So, when did we stop being naked? There is no single morning. Nobody invented the outfit. What we have is a ladder that runs from a dress in a laundry pile at 5,000 years, down through woven bark, down through pink thread in an Ice Age cave, down through a needle in South Africa, and finally down into the DNA of a parasite that says at least 83,000 years, possibly 170,000, possibly earlier than anything we'll ever find. And here's the thing that should genuinely rattle you. Even at the deepest estimate, we lost our fur over 1 million years ago, which means our ancestors walked this planet completely bare for hundreds of thousands of years before they ever covered up. Being naked isn't some ancient chapter of our story, it's the vast majority of it. Clothing is the recent, weird, experimental phase we're currently living through, and you woke up this morning and voluntarily continued the experiment. So tell me honestly in the comments, if you could go back and live in that long naked era, no clothes, no laws about it, no laundry ever again, would you actually do it? Be honest. I'll see you in the next one.